Members, we have a quorum and this is the appointed time. We have 4 sessions today. After the first session, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then the next session will begin at 10:50 and the meeting will be adjourned at 12:50. The third session will begin at 3:15, and after the third session ends, we'll take a 10-minute break, and the fourth session will begin at 5:25 p.m. I remind members that if you have direct or indirect pecuniary interest in relation to the items discussed today, please, before you speak, disclose the nature of your interest in accordance with Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure. I also remind members about the voting requirements where there is direct pecuniary interest according to Rule 84 of the ROP. We'll continue to discuss FCR 2017-18 paper 14. Members are invited to endorse the PWSC's the proposal endorsed at the PWSC, that is in PWSC 2017-18-2. The upgrading of the remaining part of 272 RS entitled High-Tech Sports Park construction works to Category A at an estimated cost of $31.8 billion to support the further development of sports in Hong Kong. The PWSC spent 5 hours in deliberating on the proposal. The administration has also submitted a number of supplementary papers. The Finance Committee held meetings on the 17th and 22nd of June, spending 6.5 hours on the item. The administration has also supplemented the number of papers. I remind members that questions raised at this meeting must be directly relevant to the item, and members should refrain from repeating the points already discussed by other members or the PWSC. As for policy issues, they should be raised at the electrical council meeting or the panel meeting. I also urge members to submit motions moved under 37A as soon as possible, so that with the assistance of the Secretariat, we can I can have ample time to read the motions. I declare that I'm the NED of Bank of East Asia, and we have Mr. Lau Kwong-wah, Secretary, and his team with us today. So, Mr. Eddie Ju, this is a hypothetical question, but I'd like to have an undertaking from the Secretary in relation to Sha-Tin Central Link. When we examine the proposal on additional funding because of cost overrun, we note that in terms of the papers submitted by the administration, the way the accounts are reported is based on the price adjustment, that is the construction cost plus the factor for price adjustment. However, we discovered in the Sha-Tin Central Link proposal that instead of using a floated price adjustment approach, you take a fixed approach with a target price such that it doesn't tally with the original project cost. So I just want to know from the Secretary that in the event of additional funding required because of cost overrun, sorry, Mr. Eddie Ju, your time is up. But I want to remind you and other members, because we have new faces, if you refer to the procedures, 25H it says very clearly that members should not raise questions on hypothetical situations or seek to clarify a point of policy. So I don't think you should ask a hypothetical question because it is pointless. Whereas if you really have a substantive problem, question, you can raise it. So at least you should not include the words hypothetical in your question next time. Secretary, any response? Chairman, I may not have enough time, so perhaps Mr. Eddie Ju can submit a written question and I will give a written reply. And I can also go back and check on the Sha-Tin Central Link and then give a response. So Mr. Eddie Ju, please write to Secretary. Ms. Tanya Chan, 5 minutes. I'd like to ask about the $60 million. I've done some research. In some places, the proposals would be assessed, and then the score be given to the proposal, and then the funding would be granted on a proportional basis. And I understand that at present the approach is that it's either $60 million or the half of the cost, whichever is lower. I'm looking at the incentive workshop mentioned in your paper, and as mentioned just now, are you going to assess the proposal and then award a score and then pay in proportionate to the score? It may not reach 50%, but by taking this approach, you have flexibility and you can sort of buy the copyright from the bidder. So will you take this approach, assess and award a score? I'm not referring to any actual example, but will you consider this approach, and have you considered this approach before? P.S. Chairman, about bid incentive, there is no assessment of score or scoring necessary. At the time of submitting the bid, the bidder will be required to tell us the bid incentive that they're requesting, and also the cap, and for each cent of the incentive, it has to come with receipts, and there should be independent auditor auditing the accounts to verify the accounts. So my point is, I understand that it should be done on a reimbursement basis. At the same time, of course, the Kai Tak project is unprecedented in Hong Kong. I want to avoid as much as possible any chance of fraud. I want to make sure that what you are buying is good. That is why I propose that we give scores to the bidders, and then we provide bid incentive proportionate to the scores awarded. I wonder if this is a better approach. I just want to know whether you have taken this into account. Well, Chairman, our scoring mechanism is very complex. We consider the quality, the split that they're proposing with the government, etc. So if the bid itself doesn't meet our criteria, we're not going to award any score at all, because although we have requirements in the tender document, the bid should meet all the certain requirements, such that we have set the threshold or standard, so to speak. They must reach the threshold before we consider the bid incentive. As for the intellectual property rights, we only have the right to use the IP rights. We are not buying them out. So that means my understanding is that after the payment, since you decide to use the IP rights or the copyright, you're not going to pay another sum, so you are buying out that right. If you don't include this in the contract, that would be troublesome. I want to make sure that this is in the contract, because you seem to suggest that you reserve the right to use it. But I'd say that rather than doing that, you should include the words full and final no settlement in your contract. I think it's clearly set out in the FC paper, Chairman, that we have the right to use any of such IP rights, and at the time of submitting the bid, even if the bidder is unsuccessful, the IP right can be used by the government. But it doesn't mean that we have exclusive IP rights taken away from the bidder. We have the right to use the rights. All right, so the use of that right lies with you, then that's important, because otherwise, if the loose ends are untied, it will be troublesome. And the other point is this. Members have asked different questions. I don't know whether this one has been asked or not. I'm looking at the executive summary, the one in January 2014 on Kai Tak project, and if I remember correctly, for 4.2.1, there are a number of options, but not anything about DBO. And Dr. Edward, you yesterday talked about a philosophical DBO. You want to ask a question again, then press the button because you'll be first on the queue. So if you press the button, you can allow them to answer right away. Secretary or which officer would like to take the question? Should I go on? We mentioned that in January 2014, in the Pricewaterhouse report, there are a number of recommendations, and in 2.4.1, it was mentioned that initially their study was whether the private sector could participate in the investment, but their recommendation is that if there is investment from the private sector, the investment ratio would be very small in order to generate a reasonable return, and that is 5%. That is why, as we explained yesterday, if this is done by way of a public works project, the consultant recommends a DBO approach, and that is 4.2.2.5 in the report. So in the last paragraph, and if the government decides to use PWP, then DBO should be adopted. Yesterday, Professor asked about DBO when he discussed with the consultants, and the consultants have tried to give a number of examples, but if I remember correctly, Dr. Yu suggested that these examples do not tally with this proposed approach, because for 4.2.3.1, it says that DBFO would be the most desirable approach, and it is given the highest score. So I just want to know why, at the end of the day, you have given up on DBFO and opted for DBO when there is no such example for our reference around the world. According to the report, if we can consider DBFO if we opt for private sector financing. But in the subsequent paragraph, there are a number of considerations, and that is the reason why the government have finally opted for a public works project. That is, if the government wants to have full project control, we should go for this approach, and this is the main reason. For DBFO, we do not have any experience in Hong Kong. So we're concerned that in terms of financing and fundraising, we may not be familiar with these matters. And for DBFO, the financing arrangement for the consortium would be very complex, along with the relationship with the government. So it is agreed that if the government proceeds with the project on DWT, DBO would be the desirable approach, and that is the main reason why the government has finally decided to fully fund the project under the DBO approach. Well, taking the present example, if we do something, well, let's say the airport authority is something similar to the DBFO approach. We set up the airport authority, which is responsible for financing, and it also takes up design, build, and operate aspects of the project. Only that the government wholly owned the shares of airport authority. So can we have a statutory body in Hong Kong for this project? We do have this example, but you're just saying that there is no such example of getting a private company involved. It's very different from a Kai-Tak Sports Complex. It is a social infrastructure. We do not have the operational capability as the airport authority. It is similar, or I should say we are similar to Singapore's sports complex. They adopt the DBFO approach, but then they have a consortium led by a bank, which is responsible for raising funds. The government, on the other hand, pays out on a regular basis. Apart from the project costs, we also need to pay for the financing costs. So I'm just giving this example of Sports Hub in Singapore. We have 5 members on the queue, but there aren't many members here at the moment, so the only one here at the moment is Dr. KK Kwok. You can read the list on the panel in front of you. So I appeal to members once again that if you wish to ask questions, you should come down and ask questions. Otherwise, I'm going to end the Q&A session, and then I will move on to motions under 37A and then motion under 21. Dr. KK Kwok, how many minutes? 2 minutes. Chairman, I want to proceed with the high-tech sports complex project as well. The government has been dragging on its feet for 11 years, and when the proposal is finally submitted to the council, we find this totally immature because it is an experiment. And you're taking away the hard-earned money of Hong Kong people amounting to $31.9 billion. As for the bid incentive proposal, it is totally absurd. We're talking about daily wage of $17,000 for the public earning minimum wage. Imagine how they feel. For the government to dish out over $10,000 a day per person for the White Elephant project. There are so many controversies surrounding this project. You are the Secretary for Home Affairs. We don't want to have a social divide. Can you take back the project and then spend more time to explain to the public, the council and the sports sector? Do it properly instead of doing an experiment which costs $31.9 billion. Secretary, I agree with Dr. KK Kwok that we need to be very prudent in our design and build and the construction of this complex. It's a yes or no answer, whether you do it or not, Secretary. So like Dr. KK Kwok said, Chairman, I don't have time left. I think that he is stalling. So I am moving a motion to adjourn the discussion of this paper in accordance with the rules of procedure. So this is an adjournment motion. You have 3 minutes, Dr. Kwok, to explain why you want to adjourn the discussion of this paper. We all understand how this has come by. We could have done it better. The government has 11 years since 2006, and there is enough time for the government to explain clearly.
You should have taken up discussion with the LegCo, the sector, and also other people, but this has been with us for 11 years, and now you give us this half-baked so-called DBO option. But you are quite stern in putting forward this proposal. You are saying that if we don't do it, we will be letting down the sports sector. Look at the sports sector in Hong Kong. Let us look at the children and then local athletes. How often do they get support from the government? What we see now is that in the soccer field, I think Hong Kong people love to see local matches, but South China team is being downgraded, and then we need to have overseas teams come to Hong Kong when there are big events like the anniversary of the Hong Kong SAR. So you are not helping the sports sector at all. We don't want the money to go down the drain. What you are doing, let me think about triers in my childhood days. They will put a pot of tangerine at the front of your shop, and you have to give them money in order to buy that pot of tangerine, and you could not wait before you gave the money. And you have done this repeatedly. In fact, this is a matter for all people in Hong Kong, because the $31.9 billion will come from Hong Kong people. It seems you think this is peanuts. And there are so many other urgent matters. I'm talking about the sports sector, the chronically ill, the elderly. You are proposing to have a bid incentive. You are thinking of all the strange ways to carry on your work, but then you say there should be no discussion, no delay, and even if we ask you to adopt a prudent attitude, you refuse to do so. You are reducing the 180 million to 120 million. So it seems you can always change your mind, and that goes to show that you have not thought things through when you proposed the first time. We don't want you to repeat your mistakes. I don't want you to expend the $31.9 billion like that, because I think there will be a cost overrun that will even be more than this amount. We should not risk pouring money into the drain again. Does any other member wish to speak? Mr. Ted Hui has just left the room. If not, Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. 3 minutes. Yes. This is for adjournment. Please, yes. I'm talking about this adjournment motion. Chairman, I strongly oppose to this motion to adjourn the meeting. Yesterday, Chairman, in the protest area of the LegCo, there was a big group of athletes from different sports and others who had the heart of promoting sports in Hong Kong, and they are asking that they earnestly want members to pass this item, which is so important for the development of sports in Hong Kong. This is the first time they have seen the government showing some resolve to plow in a relatively big amount of money to help sports development in Hong Kong, to popularize it, and also to hold mega events. A few years ago, there was news saying that the government might downscale the sports park and carve out some land for residential development. And there was such strong opposition then. So the mainstream view is for the sports park to be realized. We always say that we don't have suitable venues for sports development in Hong Kong, regardless of the size of such venues. This is a golden opportunity. We, of course, would like this to be realized. From what members have said, I can see that there are many specific and concrete questions. There were 10 hours of discussion at the PWSC, and the government has positively answered the questions. And some of the views of members have been taken on board, and so the proposal has been adjusted. In these few hours of the FC, some people continued to challenge the tendering approach, including the DBO approach. Chairman, this is nothing new for Hong Kong. In the last term, the FC endorsed an important environment program, and that is the food waste plant in Siu Ho Wan. That was exactly a project subject to the DBO approach that would run for 15 years, and this one will even have a longer period. So, of course, we have to monitor the government and ensure that they do a good job. In fact, this kind of tendering approach is not uncommon in the world. It is not uncommon in Hong Kong either. As for the bid incentive, the industry has been asking for it, and in fact, bid incentive has every advantage if the amount involved is big. Mr. Ted Hui, 3 minutes. Chairman, I speak in support of the adjournment motion. From the design concept to the DBO approach, the bid incentive, all these factors that attend to the Kai Tak Sports Park are not understood by the public. I hope the administration will withdraw the paper and for the community to forge a consensus before it is taken back to the council for discussion. Thank you. If no other members would like to speak, does the administration want to respond? Chairman, first, we have spent a long time planning for this project, and there has been very good interaction between us and members, and we have also taken on board many constructive views from members. And now that we are at this stage, I think the time is ripe. I hope members will support the project. There is a good atmosphere for promoting sports in Hong Kong now. I can give you an example. Yesterday, we started to sell tickets for the billiard tournament, and my staff told me that all the tickets were sold out in 5 minutes. This is the first time we have organized it, and 4 English Premier League teams would come to Hong Kong, and all the tickets were grabbed in a very short while. I hope that given that kind of atmosphere, we should launch this sports park project. I'm sure we can take our sports development to a higher rung. But of course, in the course of discussion, and also in our internal discussion, we said we will not stop with the building of the hardware, and we would be very careful with the software, particularly how we can help the young engage in sports. We will be able to take that up with LegCo members in future. Thank you. Dr. KK Kwok, 1 minute. Please reply. Chairman, I'd just like to point out the ignorance of the secretary. You talk about 4 Premier League teams from Britain and also the match between China and the US. Well, you are spending so much money in order to invite them to come to Hong Kong. In fact, if that's the case, we should ask people just to watch Now TV and cable TV, which relate or transmit the matches. I think you are so ignorant in saying that if there are more matches in Hong Kong, people would be engaged in sports. I now put the motion to the vote that this committee decides to terminate the discussion, adjourn the discussion of SCR 2017-18-14. A division is claimed and the bell will ring for 5 minutes. I'd like to remind members that we are going to vote on whether we support the adjournment of the discussion of this item. Please pay attention to that. Will members please proceed to vote? Voting shall now stop and the result is displayed. 20 in favor, 23 against, no abstention. I declare that the motion is negatived. We will now resume discussion of the item. Dr. Loy Kwok, are you going to use your 5 minutes? Please proceed. Thank you, Chair. With regard to the DBO approach, we have heard members commenting on it, and there was also opposition. When I spoke in opposition to Dr. K.K. Kwok's motion to adjourn the discussion, I already said that DBO contracts are not uncommon in Hong Kong. There were a few environment projects that adopted this approach. The advantage is that at the design and construction stages, attention would already be paid to operational needs. And in fact, there are many such examples in other countries. But in different places, there may be different ways of working for different projects, and also the governments act differently. Therefore, amongst DBO projects, there can be adjustments according to local situations. And I don't think we need to debate on that. If you say this is only theoretical or academic, perhaps you can take that up on other occasions. Please do not use the time of the FC to engage in that kind of discussion. As for bid incentives, as the representative of the engineering sector, I like to explain that actually many years ago, this was advocated by the sector. But we have not said that this should apply to all government projects, because very often the sector does not think that this is necessary. But given this very complex project, especially if it is a DBO project, this is not just a tender for design and build. Rather, it is an important business plan, and the contract period will be as long as 25 years. I do believe that the consultancy has done very detailed study. And from the papers they submit, you can see that there is a certain cost to submitting the bid. Internationally, given the complexity of the tender cost may take up even up to 1% of the project cost, and this should not be regarded as unreasonable. So the bid incentive would cover half of the bidding cost, or up to $60 million. When I discussed this with my friends in the construction sector, they thought that the rate was comparable to that adopted in other countries. Chairman, during the course of discussion, a lot of views have been expressed about the design and future operation of the project. I believe the administration will take on board constructive views, and we will certainly discharge our duties as electrical councillors to monitor the realization of the project and its future operation, and to see whether it can really help to popularize sports and also help to hold mega sports events. I speak in support of the project, but as the chairman of the PWSC, I was not able to speak my mind at the PWSC because I was chairing the meeting and I had to make sure that the meeting proceeded in an orderly manner. But as a member of the FC, I can now freely speak my mind. So I speak in support of the project, and I hope the project can be launched as soon as possible and to achieve its expected results. Mr. Roy Kwong, 3 minutes. Chairman, as we discuss this Kai-Tak Sports Park, well, of course, many of us here support the development of sports, but this will be a contract period of 25 years, and we are very worried about the future operation. Looking at Appendix 1 of a tabled paper, it is said that the administration is saying that it lacks expertise in design, procurement, and operation, etc., and that there can only be 13 event days every year, and in hiring out the shop spaces, it would only charge $360 per square meter every month, but if it is done by private sector, it will charge $840. And then if it is done by the private sector, there can be 30 event days in Hong Kong Stadium.
These are not accurate figures, and we have seen very bad examples. We are afraid that the KTSP would be given to a private operator for 25 years without return. If the government takes up the $300 to $400 million worth of development fees, why can't the government operate it in the future? And the information you provided were not accurate. Over the course of discussion, we really wonder whether that approach is really that bad. You are advocating DBO, and you said it's right to entrust the sports park to a private operator. So what would be the LegCo's role as gatekeeper? I have my doubts. Well, all the commission is was appointed by C.Y. Leung, and soon it will be appointed by Carrie Lam. So that has been my question or query. Would the commission really be representative of different strata of the sector? Last week, I helped grassroots sports body in developing youth talents. I asked them about the KTSP, and they told me that the small organizations like them would never stand to benefit. So in Annex 1 of this paper, can the government say that the figures they provided for the DBG approach were all correct? And can the KTSP really benefit different layers of the sports sector? All the figures provided in Annex 1 were compiled by our operational consultant based on market condition and expertise. So we did not make up those figures, but indeed they were compiled by experts. We were not trying to play down the commercial viability of DBG in order to support the DBO approach, but these are all facts. The sports park is not just for elite athletes, because there are a lot of facilities which can be used by the public at LCSD charges. So we want to promote mega events, elite sport and popular sport. Ms. Claudia Mo. I want to follow up on what Roy Kwong said. I've seen young Pakistanis who like to play cricket, but the facilities are scarce in Hong Kong. And as Roy Kwong said, the Pakistani youth would use soft drink cans and wooden sticks to play cricket, and this is really cause for concern. You are talking about international mega events. But for the less common sports, nothing has been done to help people who want to play. We will build a number of venues across all 18 districts to support sport development. For sports such as baseball, ice hockey, or cricket, we are thinking about possible venues. Mr. Kent Leung, 4 minutes. I'd like to ask about the tendering process. And does your tendering process satisfy all WTO requirements, for example, on fairness and integrity? I understand that the tendering involves the drafting of many documents, and at the PAC, we looked at the tendering process of a lot of major government projects. Usually, you would compile the legal documents internally, but for this kind of mega project involving design, building, and operation contracts, given the volume of paperwork, will you ask external or independent legal advisors or consultants to look at your contracts? The main contract is complicated enough, and the tendering consortiums might come from different regions, so can you walk us through the process in detail? For public works program, the tendering must comply with tendering requirements of the SAR government, as well as the government procurement agreement by the World Trade Organization. As to how we draft the tendering document, we have explained in the FC paper that we have an operations consultant to give us advice, and we also employed an independent legal consultant on the drafting of various paperwork. In other words, the contractual terms would be looked at by our legal advisor. What about the process of employing your legal advisor? How did you go about hiring this team of legal advisors? For all our consultants, for example, quantity surveying consultant, operation consultant, design consultant, they were all hired upon tendering. Can you can you tell us the total sum paid to these consultants? In footnote 8 of the paper, we spent a total of $110 million. And part of the fee came from the budget for advanced works. For example, our technical service consultant, our quantity surveying consultant, as well as EIA and TIA, etc. Is this figure provided on a gross basis, or have you considered cash outlays? So this is the figure up to the stage of advanced works. Over the course of tendering, they must continue to give us advice. So some fees are still payable. So in other words, some fees have not been included in this figure. Of the funding application of $31.9 billion, part of the fee would be used to pay our consultants at a later stage of construction. Mr. Uchiwai, 1 minute. I have one simple question. Members have asked about the bid incentives. If the bid incentives are not enforced, will the government have to bear certain losses or responsibility over the course of tendering? The tendering process has not started yet. But if we are allowed to offer bid incentives, we can provide greater appeal to possible bidders. If the government can let go with the proposal of having bid incentives, then you can avoid a lot of conflicts or controversy. We have explained the benefits of the bid incentives, and we would stick with this approach. Dr. K.K. Kwok. For the main stadium, you said you want more people to use it, and there are only 30 event days in a year. In other words, it will be vacant for 330 days. Without any events or games, are you going to open up the main stadium for public use? The main stadium might only see 30 event days in a year, but we have, but more time is needed to set up and dismantle the venue. So 30 days just refer to the events themselves. When we look at other main stadiums, they would be open to the public for visits. I'm not referring to visits. For the Hong Kong Stadium, when it's not used and it's open up for jogging, Hong Kong Stadium is not open for jogging right now. I'm talking about a long time ago. I'm not sure if you were with the government at that time. Mr. Ken Leung, I want to give my views on bid incentives. I read a number of studies recently. Generally, I think bid incentives could be incorporated. More than 10 years ago, the Hong Kong Central Library, which was a landmark project, was completed wholly by the government. Since it was an iconic building at Morton Terrace in Causeway Bay, the design was absurd because there was no global tendering. It became just a building with a lot of books inside. So it was a pity because a lot of money has been invested with the hope of building it into an iconic building. When I look at the BBO library in Paris or the Islamic library, they have become icons for locals and tourists. And this approach is acceptable internationally. But that said, we have to look at the details. I will not follow up on the bid incentives anymore, but I'd like to know that in the future operation, you said there would be an advisory committee. So would that committee be a statutory body, or would it have no legal structure or constitution? We are considering creating an advisory committee. In terms of its makeup, we went to invite the sports sector, different stakeholders or legislators and district councillors because they might understand public sentiments better. So we want to solicit their support. We have no plans to make it a statutory body. And we hope to set up this body 1 year before the commencement of operation. And we hope to monitor the various indicators we draw up with the contractors. If the performance is substandard, we might introduce fines or even terminate contracts. And the advisory committee can offer advice by then. Dr. Asilai, I asked about the diversification of risk during the construction, and I have more questions today. I would prefer DBG over DBO, even though the LCSD might not do a perfect job in management, but it's still better. The government said that one advantage of DBO is that there could be 30 event days a year, but for DBG, there will only be 13 event days. And I have my doubts on these figures. When I look at the number of event days at the Hong Kong Stadium over the past 2 years, from January to July this year, we have had 18 event days. And in 2015, there were 16 event days. I don't know why the government thinks that there will only be 13 event days under the DBG approach. You are not even, you have not even considered the number of concerts. So is there a lack of confidence towards the LCSD? For event days at the Hong Kong Stadium, they included events such as the soccer games involving English Premier League teams, but we could not fill the 40,000 seater. So the Hong Kong Stadium is the home venue of 2 Hong Kong Premier League teams, so we would allow them to continue to use it. So 13 event days already included 3 days in entertainment, events, and concerts, which might involve local singers. The Hong Kong Stadium can accommodate 20 to 50,000 people. If it's run on a commercial basis, the operator might appeal to global singers and artists. So the number of event days might be more. Mr. Leung Yichong, 3 minutes. I'm sorry, you only have 2 minutes. As I said yesterday, the winning bidder would have to take up design, building, and operation. And in the operation, they will share profits with the government. And I think the eventual profits would be substantial. So that's why we have to be very strict on the tendering qualifications or requirements. I asked whether you would be or such proposal would be tailor-made for someone in particular. You said the tendering process would not be open, and I have my concerns. The gatekeeping of the vetting committee and central tendering committee would be crucial. Would the tendering committee be made up of government officials? What about the composition of the of both committees? P.S. Perhaps I can talk about the Central Vetting Committee. It is chaired by the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury branch of FSTB, which is myself at the moment. The Government Logistics Department, as well as the Public Works Departments and the Treasury, would be involved in this committee. So it's made up of government officials without any external assessors. So how can the government, the work of the government officials be monitored? We are adopting a fair, open, and transparent approach. this is what you said, but there's no way we can tell. There's a division of work and there are checks and balances. So the tendering committee is obliged to assess the different tenders received. Mr. Ray Chan, according to the paper, the operator must pay a fixed fee to the government on a regular basis. And the fee would be proposed by the operator, and it's one of the criteria for assessment. How would you establish the standards of such fee? As for the split up fee, right now there's a requirement of $200 million in guarantee, and if the operator withdraws, the guarantee would not be returned. Are you assuming that after an operation quits, you can secure another operator within 6 to 9 months, and if not, would you require to pay more money? And the minimum guarantee is $700 million. So what would be the arrangements?
Chairman, the so-called guarantee is, as the member said, to be proposed by the bidder. Well, if you believe that the guarantee is higher than the splitting of profit, then we will propose to the Central Tender Board. But at the same time, we need to consider how much the bidder is willing to pay the government. As for the $200 million bond, if the bidder cannot fulfill the obligations, and we believe that it's time to terminate the operation, then we will take the $200 million bond. And also the parent company will need to pay, on top of $200 million bond, the $700 million bond from the company. In the event of damages to be paid by the company to the government, it will altogether have to pay $900 million. Of course, Chairman, well, legally speaking, if you have, if other losses are incurred, we can claim damages through civil action. Mr. Ted Hui, the government explained a number of times at the meetings why the DBO will be adopted. Although members do not believe that this is the best approach for the Kai-Tak project, and I also have the same doubts, I'd like to have more examples from the government. For large-scale infrastructure projects in Hong Kong, were there any projects not using DBO, and in the end, something bad happened? But just now, Dr. Lo Wai Kwok already mentioned that in other projects we used DBOs before with success. But in other cases, where if we split design, build, and operation, then eventually we encounter operational problems, such as the cruise terminal. The ASD was responsible for design, and then we went through the tendering process to engage an operator. And well, what about other examples other than the cruise terminal? Any examples which failed because of not using DBO? Well, in the past, we also received donations from the Jockey Club, and the design was taken by Wimberley, and then there were difficulties with the operator. In the end, the government operated the facilities. What about sports or non-sports facilities? Are there any examples which adopt the DBO with great success? For sports facilities, we have not built such a large-scale sports complex before. So this is the first time we're adopting this approach for the large-scale sports complex. But we do have some environmental protection facility. adopting DBO before, but around the world there are examples of sports facilities using DBO. I have this feeling that you're just drawing reference from the non-sports facilities, and then you belittle Kai Tak Sports Complex, and you may be adopting the same approach for Wan Chai Sports Ground in the future. I just now asked the secretary that you said that studies will have to be conducted. We're concerned because this is a community facility, a sports facility for the public, and if in the future it is operated by a private operator, we're not confident. Are you setting a bad precedent so that the public feels that the facility can be privatized and that I may not be able to use a facility so freely? You talked about the advantages of DBO, more events, flexibility of a commercial operator. What about LCSD? There are venues mentioned by the LCSD. You can also adopt the business model of a commercial operator and improve your facility. Can't you, follow their examples? Must you engage an outside operator? Secretary, the Permanent Secretary just now gave some examples of government projects. If you separate design, build, and operation, that you may have some really bad experience. And members of this council have criticized the government for following the established practices without any new thinking. I think the most prudent approach is to follow established practices, but then there will not be any new thinking. And if there are examples with success, and if we can follow these examples and make the Kai Tak Sports Complex good, then we can also do our job properly. And like the member said, a government-run facility and one run by a private operator is totally different. We're not belittling any model, but at the moment, the government funds the project, and then a private operator operates it, and then it will also be under the public eye. And I hope the member can support us, Mr. Andrew Wen. Please do not think that we want to get in your way of getting it done. We also believe that this is for the public good. But my greatest concern is whether public money is spent in an appropriate manner. And I asked many questions on the operator. I think Secretary would understand. You raised one bad example, and that is the cruise terminal. But I think the Secretary would also agree that there is no perfect model. We need to learn along the way. But my greatest concern is on the sharing of profit. Well, in the tendering process, of course, the bidder will need to come up with better terms. For example, the profit splitting ratio may be higher, and they may pay more for underwriting. You haven't told us the formula, but But I reckon that including these conditions would make the bidder more likely to win. But the point is, the better the conditions, the more likely the operator may default on their promises. So I just want to make sure that you know how you can ensure that the operator will focus on providing sport facilities. I don't agree with Mr. Andrew Wan, but I do agree that we can't find a perfect model. In the process, we have incorporated some views of members which we believe to be good. For example, the underwriting amount, the government will not specify an amount, rather will let the bidders decide. How can you prevent something bad from happening? Maybe the underwriting amount is high, but then the risk would also be high. How can you make sure that they focus on the main business, so to speak? That is why we will have a panel set up, and I hope that by then members will continue to participate in monitoring the performance of operators. Mr. Ted Hui, 3 minutes. I'd like to follow up on the previous question, the DBO model. You just now said that this is the first time, and you talked about how good it is. It is flexible. About public venues or facilities to be used by the public, we see this trend of outsourcing government venues for private operators to manage, such as the waterfront promenade. Now it is managed by a private operator, and if I sit down to have a cup of coffee, or if I just sit down and rest, I would be asked to leave by the private security guards. And also for the PPP project, well, the podium and the greening space is supposed to be used by the public, but because of the design, it's so the public will have no access to the space. So if this is how the way businesses run, how can you ensure that the public will continue to be able to enjoy the facilities? How can you make sure, apart from the event days, that the public's access will not be affected? Well, you talk about commercial operation and the performance, etc. Well, for example, the waterfront promenade, you can set up a waterfront authority, or you can set up a committee for managing the waterfront, instead of following the so outdated rules of the LCSD in managing the waterfront. When it comes to the operational model, we're talking about the main stadium, whereas for the indoor sports center with 10,000 seating capacity and the outdoor sports ground with 5,000 seating capacity, these are community facilities. And there are 3 districts in Kowloon East which at the moment lacked sports ground, and this will be used by the districts. 2/3 of the available slots of the indoor sports center will be used for community, used by the community. Well, for example, for the international volleyball competition, at the moment it cannot be held in Hong Kong Coliseum because of the venue constraints. So in the future, we will be able to promote popular sport and also to hold mega sports events. Mr. Long Yu-chung, I understand that for contractors or cleaning contractors of FEHD and LCSD, there are just a handful of them, and we have the impression that the tendering process may be biased. For the Kai Tak Sports Complex is such a huge investment with a lot of elements, and the operator will also need to make a profit. I think that the screening process of the tendering is very important, but my concern is whether there will be a bias, because in the community there are already criticisms on the screening process and the monitoring mechanism. How are you going to address these points, Commissioner? According to the tendering mechanism, there is a central tender board, and usually the lead department or bureau, meaning the Home Affairs Bureau and the relevant department, will set up a tender committee which is totally independent of this project. There will be another team of colleagues overseeing the tendering process so as to maintain impartiality of the process. And the government has a set of procurement regulations setting out all the rules. I can say that the tender will be assessed in an open, fair, and impartial manner. Next, Mr. Andrew Wan. Thank you, Chairman. To pick up on the last point, Secretary just now replied that the government will continue to monitor us. Of course, I know that's your answer, and I congratulate you for extending the term for another 5 years. But what I want to know is the mechanism, because the operator's contract will last for over 10 years. Secretary, as we mentioned, one important task we have is to set indicators for the bidder to follow, and we will base our monitoring effort on these indicators. And in the interim period, like in 10 years, we will review the indicators. After the final review, we still have the right to revise the indicators, so that for the next 10-year period, the operator will need to follow these new indicators. So the committee will be very important. Members, we've spent 11 hours at the Public Works Subcommittee, and we've spent 8 hours at the Finance Committee discussing this project. And I believe that members are already repeating the points. So let me summarize the points. On bid incentive, we have repeated the same point 33 times at the PWSC and FC meetings. On procurement and operation model, over 40 times. And our concerns on the profit making of the operator at least 13 times, and also the operation period 17 times, and concern on possible cost overrun over 50 times. I have been very tolerant, but I think that that's more or less the time we have. So if you still have questions, press the button, and if there are no more questions, we will move on to the motions under 37A. This will be the final round. Please press buttons if you wish to speak. Dr. Lau, you may have a lot of questions. You believe that the administration hasn't been able to answer you, otherwise you would have been happy about that. But then it could not go on endlessly. I need to make a decision. You've asked questions 6 times already. We're in the 7th round. So as many other members, the 5th round, the 6th round, if we only have 1 minute for you each time, I don't think you can get a lot of answers from them. If you still have a lot of questions, then try to press your button sooner. Let me read out the names. For the last round, first one on the queue, Mr. Peter Shiu. 5 minutes. Yes, please. Sorry, the speaker's not coming through. To avoid what happened to Mr. Ted Hui last time, that in which he challenged you, after Mr. Peter Shiu spoke for 5 minutes, I think by then you can draw a line, and then different members can go for the last round. All right, please do. Mr. Peter Shiu. Thank you, Chairman. Well, usually when it comes to funding proposals at the FC, I usually give way to other members. But it is a member's duty to ask questions. I think the public would also see how many times members have asked questions. And as you mentioned just now, at the Public Works Subcommittee and the Finance Committee, altogether we have discussed the item for over 10 hours. And some questions have been repeated for 30 or even 40 times. Well, like I said, it's a member's duty to ask questions. But if we go overboard, then the public may feel that we are dragging on our feet or even filibustering. Dr. Kwokaki is not here at the moment, and I'd like to talk about the bid incentive. He moved the motion to adjourn the discussion of this paper because the administration has reduced the amount from $180 to $120 million. The reason is that supposing there are unsuccessful bidders, $60 million would be reimbursed to these unsuccessful bidders. Originally, 3 unsuccessful bidders would be reimbursed. Now there are only 2 that accounts for $12 million. If you have been engaged in building management and building repair before, you would understand that we should give greater protection to owners. And that is why we are reimbursing 2 unsuccessful bidders instead of 3, but it's actually including the successful bidder, there are altogether 3. The other point I wish to make is that some say that $60 million is a huge amount, but this is in the public domain, and Dr. K.K. Kwok may also invite his friends to bid the project, but this project amounts to $30 billion, and it takes more than just a drawing plan. It takes much more, and that is why we have the bid incentive, and I think the public understands. I'm making such a long speech because I find the adjournment motion very peculiar, because Dr. Kwok's rationale was that reducing the amount from $180 to $100 million means that the government hasn't thought it through.
Well, if the government has not conceded, then members would say you're not listening to them. And then when the government has conceded, they say you have not thought things through. And so they still wish for an adjournment. As you could see, the voting result was 23 to 20. If some members have been unable to come because of transport problems, then the entire project will be trashed. Yesterday, many sports sector people were here, and today I was outside just now, and many lorries were parked outside. They are construction trade people. We always say we want to support the sports sector. We want to support grassroots who must have work. But what are we doing here, Chairman? As you can see, I wouldn't like to speak at FCs because I would like to reserve the opportunities to other members. And I see that some individual members have asked very good questions. But there is a delay today, and tomorrow we are going to have another meeting. It's all right. We can sit here as long as you wish. But just look at the vote just now. The entire item could have been trashed if someone was held up in traffic. How can you face the construction industry and the sports sector? Many people in the construction sector say they are waiting for these major infrastructure projects. There are a lot of projects in the line. It is saying that the steel vendors are earning $2,000 a day. But if there is no work, there is no pay for them. So it is the duty of councillors to monitor the government. But we must also allow Hong Kong to proceed. If you overstep the line, in the end, Hong Kong people are watching. They are watching this live broadcast, and they may lose confidence in LegCo. Let us put this to the vote soon, Chairman. I will support the project. Thank you. Mr. Michael Tian, 4 minutes. Chairman. No one has asked this question, but I don't want to delay matters. However, I'm just curious. I'd like to know whether there is room for you to achieve better benefit for Hong Kong. About the interim review, it is said that during the interim review, the KPIs and other contract conditions will be comprehensively reviewed to see how the operator has performed individually and collectively in the 10 years' time. And if there is poor performance, you can do something. I'd like to ask about this poor performance condition. I can set you 2 extreme examples. One, that the operator has just passed the mark on every condition, and then you pay the underwriting fee every year, and then they hold 10 soccer matches, but then they only bring in teams that are not popular, and only 5,000 people come. And of course, you can't say that for every match 50,000 people should come. So anyway, they would be regarded as having performed. However, if they are laid back, they give you the underwriting fee, but then can you terminate the contract after 10 years? Secondly, maybe members of the public may want too much. Say, for example, if the operator acts like a superman and it achieves so much profit and that exceeds your expectation, and then we can split the profit. But then the maintenance fee would be higher than the profit sharing part because you don't know what the maintenance fee would be like. Say, for example, it makes a huge profit, but then we still have to fork out more money for maintenance. Would there be room for discussing the contract again at the time of the interim review? In other words, if they are very laid back and they don't do a good job, can we penalize it? And also, if they make too big a profit, can we discuss the formula with them again? Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Tian has asked 3 questions. Number 1, if it adopts a laid-back attitude and it just passes the mark on every contract term, what can we do? Well, yes, that can happen. But since we are adopting this approach, and when the contract period is 20 years and they should have a target for operation, I think that would represent the biggest impetus. We believe we can incentivize the operator to do the best job, because if he does a good job, if the venue is popular, then it will gain, and also the government can split the profits. Well, but what if they just pass the mark because they are laid back? Well, we have to abide by the spirit of the contract. Mr. Tan, you know what the spirit of the contract is like. Well, yes, I know. You have to continue the contract with them. Yes, but then after 10 years, we can explore the possibility of adjusting or varying the KPIs. Oh, you can do that? Yes, yes. Because you or I may not be here 10 years later, but we reserve the capacity to do that. We hope we can talk about the KPIs with the other party 10 years later. What if they make a huge profit? Well, we also hope they do a good job. Well, I mean, can we have a better splitting ratio because the maintenance fee may be high? Chairman, the mechanism is like this. When they put in bids, we encourage them to tell us a progression about profit sharing with us. But we have to look at the bids to see which one would represent the best public interest. Mr. Ted Hui, 2 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. In Hong Kong and also elsewhere, there are different tendering approaches for projects. Some are like this, that you have to pay people tens of millions of dollars even if they fail. And then in other approaches, if they win, they have to fork out more money. And even if they fail, they also have to show some commitment. In your paper, you quoted some overseas examples, but amongst those, most of them do include some kind of private financing. Why is it that you have gone for an approach without any private financing? Is that the best approach? Can you explain that to us? Chairman, it is not that the contractor does not have to pay a cent. As we said many times, the design and construction costs would be paid by us, but then they would have to fork out $300 to $400 million as advance payment. It is not a low percentage. And we have quoted examples to show that there is just one main stadium. And perhaps it would be used by a particular team, and so people are willing to make the investment. But for us, apart from the main stadium, in Hong Kong, we do not have any national team that would be resident at the stadium. And also, we're asking them to also build some community sports facilities. So the project feasibility or viability may not be totally comparable to overseas projects. A few consultants have all told us that even if people are willing to invest, the percentage would be very, very low. And it is better for government to have full ownership, so you have full control. That is why we have chosen this approach. Well, you say it is making a commitment, but it is only like $300 to $400 million. But this one will cost over $30 billion. Is that fair for them just to fork out a very small advantage? You mentioned overseas examples and people invest much more. Please answer. Chairman, apart from the $300, $400 million, it will also have to take care of all operating and maintenance cost. If we compare this with DBG, the maintenance or the operating cost is $9.2 billion if it's done by government. But this will be shouldered by the contractor. and maintenance. Under DBG, the government will have to take it up, but then under DBO, the operator will take it up. Mr. Michael Look, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chair. We emphasized many times that the FTU backs the project. In the course of discussion, I can see that members don't understand the basic operation of DBO. Some people say it is a private enterprise, it is going to be operated by a private entrepreneur. But no, it is like divesting a property to Link. At that time, the administration actually divested the property and it became a private operation. But the DBO is such that it is a kind of controlled or regulated underwriting mode. I think the Secretary will agree with us. This is a big event, and we are doing it the first time for such a sports facility. And later on, there will be this committee, which will monitor the workings of the sports park. We also have to watch it. There is a point made by the sports sector, and they asked me to ask the Secretary about this. Now, since this is a regulated underwriting project, there will be a kind of profit sharing with the government. Right? Can we set up a fund to hold the profit shared to support sports development? Apart from supporting sports in terms of hardware, you should also support sustainable sports development with a fund. Can you consider doing that? Secretary, Chairman. All along, the financial rules of the administration is that any department which may receive any monies should direct it to the Treasury. But Mr. Luke, you can rest assured, as I said many times at the committee, that if the sports park is supported, that will not represent the end of the matter. In the next 5 years, we are going to build many community sports facilities. And we will also support software development, whether you are talking about popular sports or elite athletes. We can support NSAs, which will help to train young people in schools. You can see how young people, young athletes are achieving great results. Many of them have been trained since very young. Apart from building a big number of facilities, well, the sports sector said if there is no facility, there is no way we can train people. But then when you have the facility and schools can act in tandem, then we can train young people and there would be better sports development. Let me explain to you again my thinking and also the views of the sports sector. The sports sector is the main stakeholder vis-a-vis this sports park. Of course, they are very active in promoting sports, but how can we use this sports park platform to promote sports even more? I believe the sports sector can do its part. And they are saying that part of the profit coming out from the sports park should be given to the sports sector. I know you are supporting sports, but if you can set up a fund to hold the profits from the sports park, I believe there would be a greater sense of belonging from the sports sector. This is what I have heard from the sector. I hope you can consider it. Secretary, I understand very well, and I have been talking to the sports sector about this. Chairman. Sorry, speaker not coming through. Yes, I'm saying, well, let me say this again. There have been 11 hours of discussion at the PWSC and over 8 hours here at the FC. The biggest issue is that many questions are repeated. Say, for example, the bid incentive over 30, 40 times. The DBO approach over 36 times. Profits for the operator over 10 times. The monitoring period over 17 times. Project cost and possible overrun over 10 times. and over 30 members have spoken altogether over 100 times. I think it's almost about time. As I said, please press the button because this is the last round, meaning that you can exhaust your rounds. If you are speaking for the first time, you will have 5 minutes, but maybe you have 1 minute. But depending on how many rounds you have had, this will be the last round for members. There are over 5 members. No, why are you saying there are over 5 members? No, you are saying that each member has asked questions for 30 times. Well, not every member will ask questions because some questions have been covered. If members think that they are reassured by answers given to other members' questions, they may not speak. But I hope you now understand the proposed arrangement. Let me again tell you the arrangement. After this project, after this segment, we'll get on to 37A motions, and then we will have to deal with the Para 21 motion that we are going to tackle for the first time, and you will have 3 minutes each. Miss Claudia Mo. Chairman, I'd like to clarify something. You said that when we have the last round, usually we will be given 3 minutes. Why is it that you say, depending on our own circumstance, we may have only 1 minute? Well, it is because... Is it because of Mr. Ted Hui? No. It has nothing to do with Mr. Ted Hui. The thing is, the situation is evolving. In the past, few members would get to the 5th or 6th round, but this time around, members who always speak are going for the 5th round or 6th round. In the past, we said the time was already quite long, and then some members would only ask 2, 3, or 4 rounds, and then I already stopped them. But then this time around, many members have got on to the 5th or 6th round. But still today, I allow you to ask questions because I want to be as fair and just as possible. So depending on the members' circumstance, they will have the last round. We are trying to improve the system, but I have learned from experience. Mr. Ray Chan, I'm not trying to change your decision or debate with you. You said that the 1 minute rounds may not be very meaningful, and that is why you said the last round would be for 3 minutes. I think that arrangement would be comparatively more efficient. But now if you only allow 1 minute, as you know, we can't ask anything within 1 minute, and the only thing I can do is to resolve to an adjournment motion, so we have 3 more minutes to express what we want to express, because in fact I have many questions that have not been asked. Well, I don't encourage you to resort to the adjournment motion so as to vary my decision. But I'm a pragmatic person, and I don't want more delay for the meeting. If you are so concerned, then okay, I'll give you 3 minutes. And this will be the last round. I hope members will not call for adjournment anymore so we can focus on questions. Okay. Mr. Jeremy Tam, 3 minutes. Okay. It's my last chance, right? Yes. Sorry. I'd like to say something about transport. Next week, the Kowloon East monorail project, which is the efficient or environmentally efficient link, its alignment is not finalized yet, but it will run very close to the Kai Tak Park. In your plan, if indeed there will be a station of the link which will be very close to the park, well, I understand that it will probably choose the option of an elevated rail. If there is such a station, how will it link up with the 3 sports facilities at the park? Secondly, if that happens, to the east of the main stadium and also the public sports ground, as you know, there is a park to the east of these facilities. Would it be that you will allow some land for the use of the station if it is required because of engineering considerations? I'm not asking you exactly to do it, but could you have that as a reserve option so you can talk to the future operator or the future construction of the link? As you know, they are now responsible for construction and operation. But in the future, if there is going to be this station from the efficient monorail link, and they have to use the site to the east of the park, would there be this reserve option that you would allow them to use it, or are you adamant that the green belt cannot be used? P.S. When we drafted the design of the park, we had very close liaison with the Development Bureau and also the Energizing Kowloon office. We understand that the monorail system might relate to Kai Tak. So in our design, we have reserved some land for the station. As Mr. Jeremy Tam said, if a station has to be built in a nearby park, we will tell the operator that we can set back the Kai Tak park so there can be a station. In other words, this is already in the design. Yes. But then what about the interface? Very probably it will be an elevated rail, but then you cannot rule out the at-grade option. Are you providing for both possibilities? If it is elevated, then it can connect directly to the park, and if it's at grade, how people can walk into the park. Are you considering that? Are you reserving land for both possibilities? That depends on the final design.
Right now, there's barrier-free connectivity between the ground level and upstairs, and wheelchair users can access the sports park. Mr. Jeremy Tam, for the monorail, you cannot, you shouldn't ask the wheelchair users to access the monorail via the ground floor. That's why I asked you to come up with a backup plan. We know that we are likely to have a monorail system, but this is still under consultation. Ms. Elvin Young, 3 minutes. Mr. Michael Tian talked about the possibility of an interim review, and the Secretary said that the relevant indicators can be revised after the interim review. To what extent would change be made? Because we are only talking about an interim review, and there might be wholesale changes. Can the contractual terms allow wholesale changes? What kind of changes do you actually anticipate? Since the time frame is rather long, it might be difficult to see what will happen 10 years from now. So that's why we can only set objectives. It's inappropriate at this time to anticipate the extent of changes. But hopefully, through constant monitoring in the next 10 years, we can have answers after the interim review, and we would know which indicators have to be revised. And different changes might be applied to different indicators. I think this would be a more pragmatic approach. The Secretary's stance has been ambiguous. Does it mean that terms would be available in the contracts which allow for changes to the contract after 10 years? Well, I have been very specific. We might not actually revise the entire contract, but there must be indicators, and all these indicators have been listed in our paper, and these indicators can be revised later on. As to the extent of the change, we would wait for the interim review. In other words, when signing the 25-year contract, the winning bidder might be subject to such risks that the contract might be revised. Can you confirm that, Secretary? We can have an interim review on the indicators after 10 years. Dr. Edward Yiu, 3 minutes. Thank you.
首先呢，我就上星期
Last week, I found that your paper was misleading to the public, and I'm not repeating myself. I want to point out that in the papers submitted to the Legislative Council, the contents, parts of the content were not true. And yesterday, you submitted additional information, and you tried to redefine DBO in order to cover up your inaccurate facts, but your definition was different from the World Bank's definition. And you said you were only giving us your philosophy. So that means everything is about philosophy, and there are no grounds. Since the consultant is not here today, I would not talk about the World Bank's definition. In the efficiency units on the 2008 guidelines for joint ventures, there was a clear definition on DBO. The contractor must pay all construction costs, and upon commissioning, the government will pay. So this is the true definition of DBO on page 8 and page 57.
construction cost is paid upon successful commissioning of the facility. 我想請問局長，今次呢一個啟德體育園項目
For the Kai Tak Sports Park, are you going to follow the 2008 guidelines by the efficiency unit? The government would the government only pay upon full commissioning? In terms of the payment, I would delegate to my team. The government's papers were not untrue or misleading. Dr. Yiu talked about a definition from an international body, and in my reply yesterday, I've said that different international bodies all have different definitions. Dr. Yiu talked about the government's internal guidelines, and there are differences with the World Bank's definition, and that's why different bodies can have different definitions. And different bodies would have different approaches. So are you going to follow that definition? We feel that our approach is most pragmatic. Dr. Yiu, please calm down because that's not good for your health. Dr. Lau Siulai, 3 minutes. Dr. Yiu's question was very valid for the long-term venue. The contractor was asked to pay up before the government would approve the project. So we are merely looking at past experience. The government's approach is very innovative. Now, a lot of things were untrue or fabricated. When you compared DBO and DBG, I asked about the number of event days. You said DBO would facilitate 30 event days. That's why you would prefer a private operator. But when we look at the details, and it actually includes the Hong Kong Football Association, the World Cup qualifiers, Asian Cup qualifiers, all these are already taking place in other venues. And even under DBG, these matches would still be held. So why would you only anticipate 13 event days under DBG? You talked about potential new games such as the Asian Track and Field Championships, but there is no track at the main stadium. How can you hold a Track and Field Championships? I don't really quite understand. I understand you are talking about potential competitions, but why would you only anticipate 13 event days under the DVG approach? Even at the Hong Kong Stadium, there are 18 event days, and we are not even talking about other events at other venues, so you are being misleading. So why is there such a big difference between both approaches? Chairman, let me address the payment issue first. When we look at past experience elsewhere in the world, well, these are government guidelines. You are not even following your internal guidelines. So I'm referring to the Moncton venue you talked about. The payment would be given in phases. We are not inventing anything new. We would simply pay in stages. In terms of the number of event days, we have explained that at the Hong Kong Stadium, we have about 19 event days per year. The majority are Hong Kong Premier League games. But it's also considered under DBO, but why don't you consider them under DBG? We did not consider the Hong Kong Premier League matches under both approaches. Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, 3 minutes. Chairman, I think there's no need for Dr. Yu to be so agitated. You asked whether they would follow the approach. Of course, they would just follow what their bosses say. They would just follow the instruction. Well, the 3 consultants or the 3 philosophers are not here, so how can we talk about the philosophy? The 3 of them are not here today. Did they decide not to speak anymore? Under DBO, the contractors, well, you asked the 4 consultants, and you're not being honest. This is one great lie, and it's been exposed. And so, Chairman, are you going to follow the order or follow the order of the China Liaison Office? And just like Mr. Tan, are you answering his call? You work for the Bank of East Asia. Did he call the Bank of East Asia? And is the BEA involved in this? This is totally rubbish. A lady called me this morning. She has some polio and she has no money, and she lives in public housing. She asked if I could help her apply for a higher subsidy. She's not qualified for a higher payment of CSSA because she's only 50 years or so. This stadium costs $8.8 billion. Well, we have a stadium already in the Hong Kong Stadium, and we said that the stadium could be used for a long time. And with the 38,000-seater Hong Kong Stadium, our sports can develop, and now the average attendance is less than 3,800. Well, Mr. Young, if you care so much about sport, you should prevents South China from being relegated. So I'm going to give you a yellow card, and I will propose to adjourn. Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, so please explain why you want to move a motion to adjourn. Chairman. Well, Horace Chang knows the difference. Are you going to follow the rules, Mr. Leung Kwok-hong? Please come back to the topic. Is your soul with you? Did Mr. Andrew Leung teach you a lesson last October? It's been a year. You know, this is ridiculous. Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, come back to the topic, please. This is a dishonest use of your mouth, or dishonest use of your brains, or your bottoms. You are at the wrong seats. How can Mr. Lau Kong-wah talk about finances? You need to ask Mr. Chen Kai-kyun to be here. We asked about the Wan Chai Sports Ground, and you wouldn't care, and they only cited the TDC study, so you're ignoring public sentiments. We have another project upcoming, a $12 billion monorail. We said that we really needed the cruise terminal, but now no one is using it. And you want to build a monorail to the cruise terminal, and it takes $12 billion. What about the lady I met this morning? When can she receive some help? Should I ask her to call you? Or should I play that conversation live? You are squandering money. The Hong Kong Football Association is very limited in ability, and it's a limited company, the HKFA, and it can dissolve any time. So that's what have they done in developing football. And do you know how to play football? The kitschy venue was converted into housing. Well, even the DAB had to voice out, without the venue for kitschy, you cannot build housing there. And you talk about sports development or sports sector. The sports sector asked me to tell you to shut up. They never gave you any support. Leung Kwok-hong, well, you mentioned me, so I have to address what you said. I never received any calls to asking me to wrap up this item today, but my conscience told me to chair the meeting fairly, including allowing members to speak in a fair manner. So please be assured that you will have enough time for your questions, and there's no need to launch personal attacks. The meeting is now suspended.